It's a beautiful Sunday here in beautiful Hampton Roads. And once again, we're starting our Commonwealth Conversation Series on the Election Overview 2022. It's midterms. What are the issues? What's important? Why should I vote? Stay tuned as we discuss Election Overview 2022. Welcome back. It's State of the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. Thank you again for joining us as you do as we broadcast here on Sundays, every Sunday, here on the campus of the Norfolk State University, live on the air of WNSB Hot 91, the soul of VA, in beautiful Hampton Roads, Virginia. Of course, as always, we've got our phenomenal producer, Marvin Folks, also known as DJ Scandalous, which you can hear on the air every day, Monday through Friday from 2 to 6 p.m. And look, Scandalous, I think I heard you on yesterday as well, on Saturdays. So, we've got some great things that we're doing here. The station is thriving. It is a part of the community, and we're part of the community too. Here at State of the Water, an initiative of the Center for African American Public Policy. You've been supporting us for the last 2 years, and we are going strong. Over the course of time that we've been on the air, our whole purpose is to bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to discuss issues important to the community. And during this series, during the summer, we're talking about the election, the midterm election, 2022. Now, of course, this is an off-presidential year, but the midterms are extremely important. And we want to make sure that we inform you and engage you about issues that are very important. A lot of times we talk about politics, it was just one thing you do once a year and you're done. But it seems like every day there's something that's out there, a new Supreme Court decision, a new march, a new protest, a new challenge in Congress, something that's going on across the world. Well, for you, we like to bring those that are at the cutting edge, those that are making strides, those that are making policy important to you to talk about these issues. And today, for our Election Overview Series 2022, we have with us a phenomenal political analyst, a world traveler, influencer, and U.S. Army veteran, Adam Roosevelt, my good friend. How you doing, Adam?
Eric, it's good to be with you, and it's also good to be with Norfolk State University and with the fine folks in Virginia. So really doing very well. It's good to be with you.
Hey, look, I'm so glad you're able to join us. You are a native son of Hampton Roads, but right now you're actually calling us, not from Hampton Roads, but you're calling us from the United Arab Emirates, right?
That is correct, right from the desert, and the heat is still very strong, but it's good to see both sides of the world and become a change agent on both sides.
Absolutely. Look, you're so young. You were one of the youngest African-American CEOs of a major corporation. You're a former candidate for delegate. You're a U.S. Army veteran. You are a major force in the especially conservative movement, especially African-American conservative movement. So many things to name. It will take a whole show just to go into it. But let us know kind of what's going on in your world right now.
Sure, Eric, and for the viewers out there, thank you for listening. I came to the United Arab Emirates for a small period of time, and within a year and a half of work on the ground and maneuvering, I was appointed to be a board member of a private office of the royal family. And essentially that has put me in a role that is quasi-business and quasi-government, essentially, to influence the trade relations of the United Arab Emirates from one of the emirates under the patronage of a ruling member through a sheikh. So that's one of my largest achievements in my life, but it really puts me in a position to advocate for two worlds and build trade bridges that will help move the economies globally and address some of our most critical issues, food insecurity, energy, foreign direct investments, and even politically speaking, we're able to kind of build new futures by integrating people across multiple sectors and, shaping the 21st century based on today's growing issues as well as solutions that we put forward.
Adam, we were talking before the show about, just having the opportunity to influence the world and the importance of America in that narrative. We're the beacon of light. And there's one thing that the world looks at America for, and that is freedoms, opportunity to have an idea, opportunity to go forward with that idea, opportunity to be the best you can be, opportunity to own your own business, raise your own family, worship the way you want to worship. It's those things that we not only hold near and dear to our heart, but we also export to other countries. So the fact that you're over there in the United Arab Emirates in the Middle East, making that impact speaks to the value of America. And with that, you talked about a lot of issues that food insecurity, some, trade relations, diplomacy, kind of a lot of issues that we're dealing with here domestically as well. So I know you're locked in on what's happening here politically, but just from your viewpoint, from the 8 years of the Obama administration to the 4 years of the Trump administration to now 2 years into the Biden administration, we're almost at two decades of different changing policies and people and places. Where do you think America is, and where do you think we're going?
Well, I can tell you that America is in a degraded position publicly in terms of its strength, in terms of being trusted as a security partner. And there has really been key events that have led to our image being tarnished. I think we all have followed the wars and the campaigns. I participated in the Afghanistan war, 2 tours to Afghanistan. And one of the big events that had started this question about America's position in terms of peace and global security was our withdrawal from Afghanistan. So that has led to a cascade of events that effectively are allowing our foreign partners to challenge America's status as the number one leader, not just of the free world, but even of coalitions. So I think right now America is going through an identity crisis internally, and we're trying to maintain our position on the global stage as the most powerful, as the most focused on security from a peace perspective. But we are losing ground depending on what side of the aisle you're on, not just domestically, but also internationally. And I've sat with many people, Eric, and it's been unfortunate that we're seeing this public image of America degrading, and I'm hoping we put ourselves back on the right track.
So that's interesting, which kind of leads me to thinking, what are we doing as Republicans and Democrats? We know the domestic view. Internationally, how are the Democrats and Republicans viewed nationally? And then here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, like I said, I know you're still keyed in. I know you're over doing a phenomenal job in the Middle East, but just domestically, what do you think Virginia's doing?
Well, I think Virginia has a new image with Governor Glenn Youngkin, which a lot of us have been looking at the leadership. And now with the change of command going from the former governor who was Democrat to now the current governor who's Republican, they're still new. And I would say that Governor Youngkin obviously is going to push out Republican policies. He's been doing that already. We've even seen some initiatives like the gas tax cut, which has not been approved yet, but that's more of a Republican focus, is reducing those taxes during a time where the economy is moving toward a recession. Some say that we are in a recession, so that's Virginia as well. And how can we still recover from the pandemic and as well as address the Russia-Ukraine war? From a state perspective, our economy is still hurting. Jobs are still hurting in terms of people being able to get jobs and still afford to live, so the cost of living is increasing. So we're having to look at that from a state perspective. And again, the governor is going to try to keep the Republican agenda first, which is limited government, lower taxes, and pushing out these initiatives. We do have the governor's house, and we do have the House. The Senate does belong to the Democrats, so you're going to still see a tug of war between what is the best way forward. But again, I think one thing I'll say lastly is that Governor Youngkin has been able to survive without being under the Trump shadow, which some people are speculating that he may be moving toward a future for presidency. I think it's a little too early to say, but it's an interesting perspective. But he is an independent Republican voice who has been able to sidestep the Trump influence, and it's a very interesting position to be in.
It's funny you mentioned that. I've had that conversation very early on with a lot of insiders, and like I said, it's maybe a little too early to say, but let's just say that he's making a strong push and a strong impression, especially on that side of the aisle. When we talk about, the national look, what do you think would be do you think there's an impact on what's happening nationally for the Dems and the Republicans as it relates to our midterms here in Virginia?
Here's what I would say about the midterms. The midterm elections shows us America's heartbeat, and in this case, it serves as a poll for the 2024 presidential year. A lot of people are saying that, the Republicans are poised to take the House. And this is largely because of the performance of President Biden in terms of foreign policy and domestic policy. We measure the performance. So when people are unable to afford groceries, when mothers are unable to afford or even get baby formula, when gas prices are too high, people began to judge the existing administration because they're looking for breaks. And I think that right now we are seeing so many issues from a foreign policy perspective, and it's now impacting us domestically, and it's changing the way we see things. And the last thing I would say is we got so many breakthrough conversations with Supreme Court and women's rights. So these are also some issues that are also forcing some real changes in terms of who you want to support politically, how you see the Supreme Court. So it's just a very difficult time, but these midterms are really a way to gauge America's heartbeat, and it's a poll, in my particular perspective, for 2024, the presidential year. And I would say that President Biden, based on the Iowa poll, Des Moines poll, they say 67% of the people who were polled participating, they hope that President Biden does not run for president. There's many polls, but I would say conclusively all the polls I've reviewed have shown President Biden to have, approval rating anywhere between 30% and maybe a little bit above the 35%, which, again, is a showcase of performance and favorability.
Just like the Raging Cajun says, it's the economy, stupid. It's all about the economy, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. We talk about the House, and Republicans, of course, that's the House of the people. We're talking about the House of Congress, our representatives that serve there. That's going to be a major fight, and that's really where everything starts and kind of where everything ends as well. We've got some very interesting races taking place. And in particular, we've got some races here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We got Congresswoman Lane Luria being challenged currently by Senator Kiggins in the area. And they're looking at that race to be one that possibly could be a game changer, not just here, but also nationally. How do you view that race here in the Virginia Beach area?
Well, Virginia Beach was actually where I spent my youth. I went to Ocean Lakes High School. But, beyond that, we've got a strong defense industrial base down in Virginia Beach. And, there's a lot of activity in terms of trade and military. So I think that's one big point that we should highlight. I would say this. Every race to me is judged by, the ability to change the tide. And they see these races, particularly this one, as one of these hot ones to pay attention to because, if the Republicans do take this particular seat, it makes Virginia more stronger, but overall it contributes to that additional seat that the Republicans need in order to take the House. And I served from a private sector perspective, investing into Republican donor relations. I worked with the National Republican Congressional Committee, so there's a lot of activity behind the scenes to make sure that every contested seat is won, because the bet is that we may be able to win this seat. We also got Hung Cao, who's former Vietnamese refugee and a retired Navy captain. So we're seeing a lot of activity in Virginia. There's three races that I'm particularly looking at, and this is one of them.
You're listening to WNSB, the soul of VA. This is Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. You're joining us as we continue our conversation series on the election overview 2022. It's the midterms, an important election that will help to decide the future of the House of Representatives here in Congress and also the future as we move forward here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Joining us, we have Adam Roosevelt, a political analyst, former candidate for the House of Delegates here in the Commonwealth of Virginia and currently serving in the United Arab Emirates. Adam, you mentioned there are a couple other races that you have your eye on. What are those two other races?
Well, I would say, Hung Khao is one. And, there's another one that you have to forgive me, Eric. I review so many races across the 50 states, but there's an additional one that we're looking at. It's just on my sheet. I don't have it in front of me, but Hung Khao is one. The one we just talked about is one, and there's a third one, so I have to come back to you on that one. But the reason why I'm particularly interested in Hung Khao's race is because, one, he's got a story, being a refugee, and then obviously having served in the United States military. So we're always focusing on the military in terms of the veterans who serve, because I believe they have a voice that's underrepresented, but they have innovative ideas that could change the district in terms of how they evolve, in terms of trade relations, and as well as in terms of investments, foreign direct investments, which is more of an advanced conversation. But particularly those two, and the third one we haven't talked about, is what I'm really focused on. But I've got other states, especially like Florida as well, which is hot for us. We've got the governor down there, DeSantis. But that's kind of what we're focusing on at the moment.
You know what? You mentioned the governor in Florida, and we were talking about a possible GOP presidential candidate. And I think when we take a look at it, I think you got DeSantis and Youngkin probably going head-to-head to get that GOP nomination. So you heard it here first.
It's an interesting one. He's too early, though, I think. I think he's too early. He's still getting his feet cemented into the governor's role, but I think DeSantis has a much more favorability. We haven't done any polls on Youngkin because he's not officially announced. I mean, with Trump being the leading nominee guaranteed, I don't think Youngkin has the credibility yet that he will get in time, but he's just so early in the position. It would be too early for him to announce.
Well, we're going to come back and talk about that later because after the midterms, because that's when it all starts up. We all know after November in the midterm year, that's when we start talking about our next presidential race. But, one thing that, we talked about inflation. We talked about the price of gas, and gas is going down. Maybe you can have some influence over there over in the UAE, Adam, I don't know. But fuel is going down. But the cost of fuel, the cost of food, and the cost of medicines, the cost of everything is still staggering for a lot of households. And we know that that's going to play a major part in this midterm election. But another major issue, which normally isn't one that's going to play a part, are Supreme Court decisions. Now, I don't know about you, but I've taught constitutional law for over a decade and civil rights, and for me, I haven't seen this type of movement in the Supreme Court, these major decisions, since the Great Depression era with the New Deal, with the civil rights legislation and laws that came about in the 60s and 70s. But now, 50 years later, in the 2020s, the Supreme Court are making decisions that's really helping to change the course of time, especially on social issues. Adam, from your viewpoint, what do you think is the influence of the Supreme Court decisions on the electorate?
Well, first, I think that if we look at what President Trump said, he had predicted that if he was able to nominate conservative justices, that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned. This was already predicted when Trump had made this statement. Now, in today's world, I think what influences these justices is simply what their principles and values have been prior to being put in those positions. So, obviously they're sitting around their colleagues and they're debating on the issues about what's constitutional and what's not, and what should change and what should not change. But again, it's a conversation of principles and values that may differ. And I would say, with this current recent ruling, it gives the power back to the states. I'm pro-life, but I'm not pro-dictatorship, and I would think that it's a very difficult position for women entirely to be told that they cannot, or condition to be set that women cannot make decisions. I think we could have chosen a more different path in how we executed this, but people are still going to pursue getting abortions in other states. And I think that, it's a very difficult time, in terms of gender rights. And there's going to be a tremendous divide on this issue, whether you're fully extreme or whether you're somewhere in the middle. But again, what influences this is the values and principles, and then even potentially even the political climate.
Adam, do you think this is an issue that the court should have pushed, and the other issues as it relates to rights and civil rights, and especially education? Because that's an issue where we start to talk about the issue of critical race theory, which I think is actually a red herring and a false narrative on teaching, history. But, and also admission standards, we're seeing the court come back to address that as it relates to using race as one indicator in admissions in certain select universities. Do you think this is something the court really should start to broach, or just let things be and let the invisible hand, as Adam Smith would say, help to dictate, who gets what?
Well, as a conservative, I've always been limited government. So generally speaking, it would align with the fact that the states would eventually get the powers back because it limits the federal government's overreach and so forth, or even the branch of government, if you will, judicial branch, weighing in. So we're now moving toward more reduced power in terms of federal government oversight. But at the same time, I think that, education is very important. But, even Betsy DeVos is now advocating for the Department of Education to be demolished. She was the Secretary of Education. Why is that? So I think the states, giving the power back to the states is a great way for us to move toward limited government in terms of federal government overreach. Because what's happening, Eric, when you put your investigative journalist hat on, there are people using these particular issues for political objectives. For example, the situation of abortion and the harvesting things that are happening with organs and so forth. No one's being briefed on this. The public isn't being told what's happening. And again, that's very difficult for folks who are pro-life to just not address. On the CRT issue, I'm a father, I have a child, and I want my daughter to really grow up with the mindset that she's an American, but she's also able to go beyond what America was at a certain time. And I think that CRT, some components of CRT may be good, but overall I think it keeps these children, in a jail system mentally where they're never going to integrate into the global system of influencing people because they've been conditioned to believe that they're less than their counterparts in school. So that's just my opinion as a father, but again, there may be some differing views.
Yeah. I think the other side of it is, my viewpoint is, tell it to me straight, give me exactly what happened, the truth, and then let me make my decision. Because history is simply his or her story, and I think when we start to create misinformation and we start to miseducate our society on exactly how things came to be, I think we do ourselves a disservice. And I think we undercut the actual value of the human will, saying that, hey, we make mistakes, but we can correct these mistakes. And
I agree.
So again, I'm one that really leans on, give me the truth, give me exactly how it is. So, Adam, as we move forward, like we talked about the Supreme Court decisions that are influencing this election, inflation that's influencing the election. What do you think what else do you think is going to influence the midterm elections?
Well, honestly, I think foreign policy, because now today we're so tied in with relying on global partners. We're so tied in relying on supply chains from other countries. That's why the movement of America First was kind of this influential movement focusing on bringing manufacturing back to the United States. But our foreign policy is now impacting what we are, how we're seen, and really our status in the globe. So I think Russia, Ukraine, how America's performing there, Afghanistan in terms of allowing for terrorism beds to be born, because in 10 years from now we've equipped the al-Qaeda state, who I fought against, and now we've got ISIL and so forth. I fought against these folks in Afghanistan, and now once we've withdrawn, we've now equipped the state of ISIL, the caliphate essentially. So I think overall, depending on what your issue is, everybody has one: women's rights, military, Middle East, Russia, Ukraine. You're starting to see more foreign policy become more important as we're judged not just domestically, but really internationally. And America will look much different in a few years if we're not protecting the individual rights of our citizens, as well as making sure we're advocating for global peace and security around the world.
You know, you mentioned foreign policy, and as Americans, and you can attest to this, a lot of times we have a myopic view of the world, you know, us being the center of it, but the world is much bigger. You know, when we look at it in a macro, like you said, there are things happening in the east of this world that's really going to have major, major impact upon the future of America and our stance moving forward. And we see it every day with Russia and Ukraine and what's going on in Europe, but really what's happening in the East, I think we have to really pay attention to. So in our closing moments, I want you to put on your, not just political, take your political analyst hat on and put on your political consultant hat. And give me, if you're asked, what is the winning game plan for Democrats and then for the Republicans to take the House? What would it be?
Yeah, if it was the Democrats, I would focus on making the message of women's rights the number one issue right now, and the Republicans have ushered in an age where women's rights are reduced, you know, with a setback. If we want to be, you know, being aggressive about what's the best message to throw the Republicans off the winning path, that would be a focus. Again, I'm not saying that that's the truth, but it is a focus in terms of attacking the Republicans and then focusing on the economy with a solid plan to get us back on track. The Republicans need to continue doing a few things. They need to continue hammering Biden, President Biden, at his failed policy in terms of, you know, I'll say climate change and how it's not realistic during the time frame in which the economy is being impacted. They need to keep hammering home on the Afghanistan withdrawal and the birth of new terrorist regimes because we've allowed Afghanistan to collapse. You know, and then additionally, I would say we need to continue on the economy as well on the Republican side and how our good performance under President Trump was. And I think those messages will be strategic ways to continue reminding the people that this is why you choose us versus them. And they're going to be extreme examples of why you side with one side or the other.
Adam Roosevelt, my good friend, I want to thank you for joining us here on State of the Water for discussing our election overview midterm 2022. You know, as we say in Virginia, every election is an important election, and every year we have one here. And this year, I think, is probably one of the most important ones. So we appreciate your insight. And again, I'm following your career, and I'm really happy for everything that's happening. And I'm really looking forward to the great impact that you're making across the world.
Thank you, Eric, and God bless you, and God bless America as always.
Absolutely. Well, once again, as we continue this election overview series, we were talking about important issues that are going to impact you. You know, and as we take a look, you know, one of our comments that we have, you know, is that, you know, how is it that we can make a change? How is it that we can let officials know what's going on? Go out and vote. You got to vote. You gotta make your voice heard. It is the number one voice that we have, number one most powerful voice that we have, and that is the ability to get out and vote. One man, one vote. One woman, one vote. Go knock on doors. Go volunteer. And make sure that whatever you do, just make sure that you make a difference. Because in life, that's what it's all about. Well, look, I've enjoyed this time with you here on Stay in the Water. Coming behind me is my good friend, Blair Durham from Black Brand and Black Wall Street to talk about economic empowerment and upward mobility. Listen, it's all about the economy. It's all about our lives. It's all about our legacy. So I sign off and say, continue to do great, do good, and God bless America.